My name is Bob Carver. I'm Vice President of the Cloud Inventory Solutions Group at DSI. My pleasure to speak to you this morning. Of course, this is an exhibitor's big ideas presentation, so I thought I'd get the big idea, and we'll try and make it as interactive as possible at the back end. I'm hoping maybe you might be able to fill in some other ideas that I haven't come up with. But we were looking at what we wanted to speak about, and we had a presentation yesterday on the digital transformation and how that's kind of driving the supply chain crazy, for lack of a better term. But I thought today I would just take time to, and I don't know if I'll take the entire 30 minutes here, but time to really just express to you areas within the supply chain that we see that are trending, that might not be something that you're thinking about or haven't seen before, and taking it from my view into your world versus necessarily trying to create a research or analyst kind of a piece for you here. It's more, what are we seeing over and over again as we get into the retail supply chain opportunities and we talk to customers like yourselves, exactly what's happening. What are the things that people are most keyed on, and where are they going? So we'll go through those trends. We'll hit the top four. I've probably got about 16 or 20 that I could go through, but I wouldn't want to belabor you for that long. But just a little bit about us real quickly. I'm sorry, just about the ideas that we looked at. You'll see a bunch splashed up here. I'll try and stay away from some of the bigger ones you see there, like virtual logistics and digital economy and last mile that people are talking about, or omni-channel on a pretty consistent basis. Maybe drill in just a little bit more into some of the specific areas here that we see trending and where they're going. So what qualifies us to even be talking to you today? Just a quick overview on DSI. We're a privately held firm. We were founded in 1979 in Kansas City, Missouri. We do nothing but supply chain applications. So we actually grew out of the old firm. We were founded in 1979 in Kansas City, Missouri. We do nothing but supply chain applications. So we actually grew out of the old J.D. Edwards world, if many of you remember that, the ERP package that Oracle has since acquired. And our supply chain apps actually used to come with the J.D. Edwards ERP package when you bought it. So we've been doing supply chain for a number of decades. And we're a mobile-first company, so we're completely centered around how we deliver an application to a customer on a mobile device. So in the retail world, our customers are using iPhones, Android machines, Windows mobile terminals, HTML5 desktops to actually access the DSI supply chains. A lot of people trending into the bring your own device type of an arena right now. I don't know if you guys are getting into that, where the employees are actually bringing their devices and using that as the interacting piece into the supply chain. I was talking to a couple guys at our booth earlier and said it's amazing how long a device lasts when it's their device that they're using at work versus the one that you gave them. But we're seeing more and more of that. It does provide some pretty interesting things for us as a vendor to be able to support 55 different flavors of Google Android on phones out there. But it is a significant trend, and that's what we do on a daily basis. We operate in that environment. We have our own standalone application that I'm in charge of called Cloud Inventory, which is an inventory system of record. A little bit different than and we'll talk about that in a bit actually, a little bit different than a financial system of record that the ERP typically is. We're seeing a trend towards independent inventory buckets and overall supply chain visibility at a different layer that really hasn't been defined within the industry. When it comes to interacting, from back-end systems or ERP agnostic. While we grew up in the J.D. Edwards world, we support pretty much every ERP package that's out there in the market. And the one that's probably hitting retail for us right now the hardest, especially in the SMB space, is NetSuite. So we're seeing a significant amount of work in the NetSuite world. So if I go on to the first area, the first one that I wanted to touch on was InStore Logistics. And when I talk about InStore Logistics, I'm talking about that back stock room within the retail store, typically a brick and mortar operation. What we're seeing is the transformation of that. And a lot of folks have gotten involved in this industry in that. I'll call it a micro WMS. We've had inventory in the back stock room for quite some time, but it hasn't necessarily been a delivery or fulfillment position, nor has it really been operated typically like a warehouse. Probably one of the biggest concerns I get when people are automating their back stock rooms that they haven't thought about is that the people that work in the back stock rooms typically didn't work in a warehouse or distribution center. So I can't tell you how many times I got something as a consumer that I could tell got shipped from the back stock room of a store. But, you get something like a fairly priceless, I should say priceless, I never buy anything priceless, but a fairly fragile item has kind of got one single layer of bubble wrap and shipped in a box that's about 10 times larger than it should be, and it's just bouncing all over in the place. And there, you can kind of tell whoever packed that has never been trained as a packer. So not only do you have systems that are beginning to automate that back-end stockroom, but you also have to have processes and capabilities in place to train your workers to actually be functional sort of warehouse and distribution center workers within a retail store. And that's something a lot of folks don't think about. That's a lot of concern. It does cause a lot of problems, and we're seeing people paying a lot more attention to that and really addressing that. The back stock rooms. One of the things that we are seeing in the industry is this convergence of the supply chain. And there's three particular prongs that we see converging on a fairly regular basis, and it's primarily driven by urban centers. You know, something like, I think they said now 65% of the population worldwide is going to live in an urban center by the year 2025. So there's within a retail store. And that's something a lot of folks don't think about. That's a lot of concern. It does cause a lot of problems, and we're seeing people paying a lot more attention to that and really addressing that. The back stock rooms. One of the things that we are seeing in the industry is this convergence of the supply chain. And there's three particular prongs that we see converging on a fairly regular basis, and it's primarily driven by urban centers. You know, something like, I think they said now 65% of the population worldwide is going to live in an urban center by the year 2025. So the reality of distribution in an urban setting and urban warehousing is something that people have to address. Suppliers and products and consumers are converging into a singular area. You used to have the decentralized sort of approach. Some folks centralize in larger distribution centers out in the Midwest, small regional distribution centers in other places. We're seeing a much more fractured approach to that as you go forward and how you're fulfilling. So these inventory locations have to be, and these distribution locations have to be co-located close to the consumer. Well, the natural fact is that there's a lot of companies that are going through the downsizing of their stores. I was just reading a report from CB Insights a couple weeks ago, and it was showing the trend, and Macy's and Kohl's and JC, even the companies that are growing. I think TJ Maxx was the only company that was showing a real estate uptick. But a number of companies are downsizing the amount of real estate that they own, but at the same time, you've got to start fulfilling these back stock room type issues, these regional, co-located distribution type issues. The natural is to try and put in the back stock room of the store. So while you might be reducing the footprint of the store from a selling standpoint, there's a lot of automation being put in place in those areas that are being vacated. Those operations are supporting the entire fulfillment strategy. We did a system for a company by the name of Rally House in Kansas City, Missouri, where we actually got rid of their distribution center a little over just about 2 years ago now, 2 years this spring. They came to us and said, you know, we have a lag of about 2 to 3 days in our supply chain because our vendors are shipping a truckload or a less than truckload to the distribution center. Then we're spending a significant amount of time breaking down 61 stores worth of inventory and basically shipping it back out. Why not just have those shipped straight to the stores? And they're regional enough. If you're not familiar with Rally House, if you were to go to a Rally House in Manhattan, it would have New York Mets and Fordham and NYU and Giants type stuff. It's all college, pro sports, apparel. So when you walk into a store in Chicago, you don't see a bunch of stuff from New York, you see stuff from Chicago. So their inventory tends to be fairly regional, but still they wanted to get rid of that distribution center. And so we actually took the supply chain applications that we had developed for them in the warehouse and distribution center and mapped those into their back stock rooms. And they move people from their DCs to their stores, and their stores now do pick up from store, ship from store, as well as store transfers. And they took about almost a business week out of their cycle from a cost standpoint. So not only are they faster to the customer, they're a little bit more reliable, and are doing it at an overall lower cost from a shipping standpoint. Although I did meet one of their suppliers here last year, and he complained to me about driving his UPS costs outbound up because he now had to do 61 shipments a day versus the one shipment that he was doing beforehand. The other thing that we're seeing too is the trend, the smaller format stores, is the trend towards the stores becoming a catalog. And what I say by that is a number of customers that we're dealing with are beginning to turn mall stores or local stores into really just a storefront for options. The consumer can go in, they can actually do the touch and feel that we all want to get from a brick and mortar type of a sale. But when they place their order, they don't walk out of the store with anything. In the meantime, there's somebody in the back room that's fulfilling that order, or maybe there's a regional distribution center if you've got enough stores in a town, fulfilling that order, and by the time I get home, that order that I place is sitting on my front step. So I don't have to worry about carrying it around the shopping mall anymore. They're taking care of the distribution at that point, and they're able to reduce the amount of inventory on hand and reduce the overall inventory carrying cost by automating that back room and providing delivery separate. So we're seeing that as a fairly significant trend in retail as well. So I don't know if you guys are, but I think that one's pretty exciting. So the next one I want to talk about is inventory management. And every time I bring this up, a lot of people look at me kind of quizzically like, what do you mean inventory management is a trend? We all have inventory management. And I would challenge that. What we find on an almost daily basis in this industry is that visibility to inventory in a monitored location like a back stock room or maybe the store shelf or the distribution center is pretty solid. When you get outside of the four walls, whether it be on a delivery van or in transit to a customer or on its way from a supplier, that inventory tracking, that actual management of that inventory really is almost more relegated to a visibility sort of a play. And it's not treated as inventory, it's kind of treated as inventory gone from distribution. It's in transit. It's not, and it's not in a pickable state. It's probably been promised or it's needed for an order. But there's a renewed focus on inventory, not only the visibility of that inventory, but the management of that inventory. And we like to call it in three areas. We call it state, locate, and authenticate. That would be the state that inventory is in, no matter where it is. So is it available to promise? Is it in transit? Is it part of a kit assembly that's being worked on? Is there what business process is acting on that inventory at this point in time? What's the location of that inventory? Tracking every location an inventory could exist in positively and with some type of scanning technology, whether it be barcodes or RFID or whatnot, to know exactly what location that product is in. That might not have been a tracked inventory location beforehand. And then authentication. How do you know it hasn't been subverted? How do you know that somebody hasn't corrupted your supply chain and you've got unauthentic product heading out to a customer? We'll talk about blockchain at the end here, but it really plays into that. Is how do you get to the point that you can authentically state that product that's heading to a customer, that you know the status and the location it's in, that it's authentic product that's heading to them. Real renewed focus on inventory management from that end. By being able to capitalize on that kind of loose inventory that's been out there in the marketplace for quite some time, it's driving faster and smaller replenishments. Less inventory on hand to cover for safety stock issues. We know where the product is. We know where it's on its way. We can replenish at a smaller clip or a smaller basis than we had beforehand to reduce our overall cost from an inventory standpoint. At the same time, it's going to reduce your back stock room inventory needs. Again, a reduction in inventory and carrying costs by knowing where that product is at all points in time. Satisfying things especially on the store floor out of the back stock room becomes a little bit more efficient. Releases the floor space for digital fulfillment. If you're managing your inventory better, whether it be within the distribution center, whether it be on the truck, or whether it be within the back stock room, you're going to release that space for better digital fulfillment. Space is money. It's not cheap. If you got the capability to track your inventory and manage your inventory at a much better level, you're going to be able to use your space better. It all seems to be something, especially if you're in the supply chain or logistics world, an area that would seemingly been addressed in the past, but we're finding more and more companies that we get into, probably, I would say on average, less than 65% of their inventory is really tracked well and positively to the point where they can state they know that state location, authentication at any point in time. So there's a renewed focus on investing in inventory management, not just visibility. And when you look at visibility, people think of some of the in-transit stuff and some of the global trade things that are going on as being inventory management. Well, really, it's just visibility. And in most cases, the visibility is relegated to a financial status. It's the movement of the inventory costs back and forth. And most of the systems that you see out there that are tracking inventory on a global basis are doing it primarily from a trade standpoint and in air, rail, and overseas type of a fashion. So they really aren't focused on the footprint here in North America. They're focused on the global trade kind of a transit and approach. And that to me just really is an inventory management. And then supports pop-up store configurations. The capability to actually be able to pop up a store quickly and efficiently and close that down just as fast based upon consumer trends or retail needs. If you don't have really good inventory management, you're not going to be able to do that. We're seeing more and more customers that are doing pop-up stores. Rally House actually started up as a pop-up store. Their big growth point was they took a bet, crazy as it may seem, to bet that the Cubs were going to win the World Series, and opened up 3 pop-up stores the year that they thought it was going to happen. And sure enough, it happened, and those 3 stores were gold for the company. But just as quickly as they pop them up, they want to be able to potentially pop them down as well too. You've got trends within the industry that are driving that product away from being something the consumer is looking for. You want to be able to downsize and not have the problem being able to do that. So the next one I wanted to talk about that we see on a fairly consistent daily basis now is urban warehousing. And when I talk about urban warehousing, there's really three things that fill in there. The urban warehousing itself, the use of micro-fulfillment technologies, and then the use of something that we see as kind of a leading edge thought process from our end, which is fulfillment as a service. So again, we talked about it before, you're seeing this continued global convergence of product, supplier, and consumer, and especially in urban areas. So the need for urban warehousing is increasing substantially. You know, there's not a lot of companies that have been adept to actually having distribution centers or distribution facilities within an urban setting. So the capability to support urban warehousing is a big need. One of the biggest problems that we see from a vendor standpoint with urban warehousing, and it's primarily the tools that customers have in place or the systems that they have in place right now, is that warehouse management or even ERP, warehouse module type operations typically aren't set up to be able to pop up a distribution center, track it for a while, and then it goes away. If you look at some of the older ERP packages that are out there in the marketplace, once you stand something up, which might be an IT project that you've got to schedule through your IT resources, it never allows you to stand down that location. It becomes a permanent inventory location without any inventory in it. But that continued global convergence in the urban areas is going to drive urban warehousing even further. Pushing that inventory to those urban centers, it's going to increase the needs for rapid delivery and response times. So that's going to dictate both your distribution as well as your inventory, or distributed as well as your urban inventory needs. You know, we've all seen the Prime effect and what Amazon has done with the 2-hour window of delivery. You're now seeing companies that are trying to basically turn that almost into a real-time delivery type of a scenario. So implementation of an urban warehousing strategy that allows you less than 2-hour satisfaction. And again, without strong inventory management, strong tools in place, and the ability to pop up an urban warehouse and shut it down almost as fast, the ability to deliver rapidly is really not there. Brings up real estate concerns. You know, decide that you want to do a business in downtown Manhattan, you need an urban warehouse, you're not going to build something here in downtown Manhattan. The real estate's too expensive. So what we're seeing is a trend towards pop-up distribution centers in office complexes or high-rises, moving into industrial parks and taking over an office building and turning that into a DC, moving into a high-rise and renting a floor and turning that into a distribution center. That's actually a fairly common practice right now over in Singapore, where there is virtually no real estate. We've got a couple customers that we've talked to, and we had actually did some work with Gartner in regards to that, where the incidences of skyscrapers being rented to actually turn into a distribution center are pretty huge. So you've got this kind of Uberization of that delivery and the need to be able to source and fulfill from just about anywhere within an urban center. And it's natural that some of that open space that's in an office building might be prime real estate to do it from. And then you've got micro-fulfillment. So the small format stores, the simplified urban e-commerce fulfillment capabilities, these ability to actually distribute and sell at a much smaller scale. So that strategy I don't think is going to stop. I think it's going to increase. And as a matter of fact, we've termed it now, we call it our capability to deliver fulfillment as a service. And what I would say is fulfillment as a service is best probably termed as Uberization of inventory management. It's the capability for a company that may have had a single large centralized distribution center and a bunch of regional distribution centers that did distribution to now have hundreds or potentially thousands of inventory nodes that they have throughout an urban center, maybe a state, it might just be a city, but you've got the capability for small partners, 3PLs, so it's almost similar to the strategy Amazon had, putting a bunch of people into business as delivery drivers. You can actually engage a number of 3PLs and have them hold on to small inventory buckets for you that are all throughout these nodes within an urban area, and fulfill from each of those and have visibility into all of those through the fulfillment as a service, and have the capability to see your inventory as it flows throughout that entire set of nodes and have instantaneous real-time access to where inventory is and potentially essentially drive yourself to real-time delivery. Now, I don't think we're ever going to have real-time delivery where you're on the phone and the guy shows up like the Jimmy John's commercial. But that's what we're trying to drive to. And I think the only way that you're not going to do that with the typical distribution philosophy that we've had in the past. You've got to have something that's got a micro-fulfillment strategy to it. And I think fulfillment as a service is really going to drive to that. Because if you've got 1,000 positions of inventory, you can start moving and sequencing inventory on a much easier basis than if I'm out of that inventory in New York and the closest I can get it is Louisville, Kentucky. It's going to take me a day to get it up here. But if I got all that inventory And it's in some arrangement that could satisfy basically the order profiles that I typically see on a day in Manhattan, let's say. And I've got a couple hundred 3PLs here in town. They each have a car and maybe 1,000 square feet of my inventory. They can transfer between each other. They could take on delivery requirements or whatnot. So I think you're going to see this happen where this kind of, maybe we call it the board maybe, right? We're going to just start assimilating a whole bunch of third-party logistics providers. But you're going to see small logistics providers that are going to be able to do rapid responses from a fulfillment standpoint. And the companies that I think figure out how to actually work and orchestrate fulfillment in that strategy are going to be the ones that are going to win. Next one I want to talk about was blockchain. So everybody asks about blockchain, and I had a bunch of questions on blockchain yesterday. And here's my take. It's an emerging trend, or maybe it isn't. The fact is that real success in blockchain right now is very limited. There was a recent study done by Gartner that said that only 10 to 11% of retail CIOs even indicate they have an active use case or project underway addressing blockchain. And where I think you see it is that most of blockchain is still in the financial end of the world. It hasn't really moved its way over into the supply chain end of the world yet. It has in thought, but it hasn't in process or reality. But with that many retail CIOs indicating active projects, it's a very small sampling. The other thing that Gartner found out too is that I think it was 95% of all the projects going on right now are small pilots in a very isolated portion of the supply chain. So you see things like IBM's food chain opportunity and whatnot. The fact is that blockchain is just being kind of, we're putting the toes in the water sort of a strategy right now, and nobody's really quite sure exactly what's going on yet. And I'll get to some of the reasons I see that in the future here. But only about 95% about 95% were nothing but small projects. The other thing that I found, that Gartner found that was probably even more interesting, that was that, I'm trying to remember, it was 60 or 80% of all the articles that you read about blockchain right now are written by vendors. And so it's PR. It's not, a lot of it's not based in reality. It's some great ideas, there's some great thought knowledge going on, there's some excellent extensions of what blockchain could do. The reality is that it's a long ways away. Gartner says that they think large use cases for blockchain are probably 5 to 10 years away, and that they opened up their London supply chain conference. The first point that they talk about was that like 90% of all blockchain use cases are fail to scale by the year 2020. So the reality is that I don't think people have really thought long and hard about it in supply chain. There's some of that traction in non-payment use cases, but most of the blockchain implementations right now are payment use cases. And where they are getting traction in the supply chain has primarily been focused on global shipment tracking. So Maersk and some of the others that are playing in blockchain have been doing it to do global shipment tracking, but the really crux of where I think blockchain is going to be positive for all of us, again, comes back to that authentication of the inventory within the supply chain, that nothing's been subverted, that there's nothing counterfeit within the supply chain. Just tracking shipments on a global basis really doesn't denote to me a blockchain implementation. The other thing that's really holding it back, and I might dive a little deep on this, but apologize if I lose anybody. When you look at blockchain, the way that blockchain has got to work is that every company that participates in your supply chain has to be open to using a public ledger for tracking of what's going on. They have to be willing to share all that information with every other company that's in your supply chain. It's going to be visible to everybody, and they have to agree to participate in that public ledger. You can't have a private blockchain and really truly expect that it's going to work, because private blockchains can be subverted fairly easily by the company that's running it. It's got to be something that's controlled, contractually controlled outside of a private entity. So it's a public ledger. For those of you that are in grocery, if any of you are here, you can remember how well it went over to those facilities, these aggregation facilities that were going to put together Kellogg's and General Mills and all the other food stuffs all on a single pallet and ship it to a grocery store. Never really took flight, primarily because those competitors had to share their supply chain data with the other competitors in order for that company to be able to effectively consolidate loads. So I think we're a long ways away from blockchain jumping on the bandwagon and moving forward here fairly strongly, primarily because of that inability for a lot of companies to really sit back and say, yeah, I'm going to participate, and I'm going to share data that low, and that's how we're going to move product around. So that's really my 4. InStore Logistics, inventory